Hi everybody, this is Todd Olthoff from ToddOlthoff.com coming back at you with another screencast. And this week we're going to take a look at the DNS service that's built into Yosemite server. Now, if you remember from our last screencast, we talked about setting up the server, and I showed you how to set up your host name. And if you remember at the end of that, it asked if we wanted it to set up DNS by itself. And we said no, so that I could show you how to do it manually. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do that manually because DNS is an advanced service. You can see it's down here under the Advanced tab right here. Let me just click on that. And I want to walk you through the DNS and how to set that up. Now, DNS is very important because if your DNS is not set up right, then your other services won't work well. If you're running a server that's just using file sharing and maybe some time machine backups, you really don't need to have DNS set up. But for all the other services like Profile Manager and all of that, you do need to run DNS to make everything work. Now, DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it basically takes IP addresses like the one you see here, this 208 number, and turns them into names that are easier for us to remember. So that this number might relate to, in this case, OpenDNS.com, and so it'll go back and say, hey, if this is if you see OpenDNS.com, go to this number, to this address, and so that's how DNS does it. It translates those things for us. So what we're going to do is take a look at the service here. And so as you can see, the service is off. And we've got a couple of sections here. We've got access, settings, and then host names. So let's start with the access for a minute. Just like all of our services, we've got a status area. You can see it's offline right now because the service is not on. But it'll change once we start the service up. Now we also have an area here for permissions, and you can see right now we have all networks. If I just click on edit, you'll see here I have the option to say for all networks, for private networks, and so those are ones that are just closed off, or for only some networks. Now in most cases, for those of you that are running a home server, all networks is fine. You can leave that alone as the default. For those of you that are running, maybe a server in an environment where you have multiple servers and you got multiple networks going on, then you might want to say only some networks and then specify the networks that you want to have the change on. So if I just click on this, you see I get this drop down that lets me specify that and put that information in there. But for most users, just keeping it on the all networks is fine because that's all you have working. So I'm just going to say cancel and just leave that alone. Now in the settings area, you notice here we've got forwarding servers, and I've got a number right there. If I just come over here and click on edit, I can add all of the forwarding servers I want. Now what this does is, based on however you have your service set up, in most cases the DNS on your server will basically resolve everything inside your network, and you may need forwarding servers to help you resolve DNS on the outside of the network. So for instance, if you're looking up a web page, you want to go to the outside the network in order to look up those different queries so that you get to the right website. If you're looking for something inside your network, your server will look to itself first. So these forwarding servers are things like, in this case, this is OpenDNS. You could put in Google servers 8.8.8.8 and make it work that way. The number that defaults in here, let me just cancel for a minute. This number that defaults comes from the airport utility. And if you remember, if we just go into the airport utility here and go over to internet here for a minute, that's the number we put here in DNS. Notice it's a secondary number, and that's the number that we actually put in there and use for our DNS. Here's my main server, and then here's the secondary DNS or the forwarding server. So I just wanted to show you where that was from. So let me just put this down. Now, we can also perform lookups for a variety of people here. We can do it for all clients or only some clients. And so let me just pick only some clients so I get this drop down here because it's an important thing that I want to tell you about. If you have a front-facing server, so that means basically you don't have a router or a modem in between your server and the internet. Maybe you have it hosted at a co-location facility. You want to make sure that it's only checked for the server itself, because if you check it for clients on your local network or on other networks, you're going to set up what's called an open relay, and that's going to be created and will get you banned from other servers and all of that. Your server will be banned on the internet and all of that. You don't want to do that. So if you've got a front-facing server, you want to use the server itself. Otherwise, you can just do the clients on the local network if you want to specify, or for all clients. So let me just cancel here. I'm just going to leave it for all clients because those are the clients that I'll have inside my server here. So all we have left now is to go ahead and set up the host names. And what I'm going to do is just come down here and say show all records. And now what we're going to do is actually set up our DNS records here by ourselves. We're going to do this manually so I can show you how that works. So the first thing you want to do is we're going to set up a record here. Let me just hit the plus button for a minute. And what we want to do is set up a primary zone. Now the primary zone would be whatever your domain is. So if you registered example.com, that's what that would be. So we need a primary zone to start. So let me add one. And as you can see here, it even gives you example.com as an example. So let me just put in my domain, which is toddolthoff.com. Okay, so I've got that information in there, so I'm all set. You can leave the zone data valid for 24 hours, and we're not going to do a secondary zone. You don't have to worry about that, but that's how we set the primary zone. So if everything's right, then you say create. And so we did that. Now you can see we've got our primary zone right here with nothing else under it. Now if I click the plus, you notice that all these other records light up so that I can add them. And let me just tell you what each of these are. A machine record is what's called an A record, and that would be for your server itself. And usually that's what actually identifies your machine. In our case, that would be like our host name that we used, which was server.toddolthoff.com. So that's what the A records are. Alias records are basically what's called CNAME records, and so that's basically an alias where I say, home.toddolthoff.com should then refer to server.toddolthoff.com, so that I can put a lot of different aliases in front of that and have all of those point to the same machine record, the same primary zone, and it will lead it in the right direction. We have mail exchanger records, and that's what we use for mail. If you're using the mail service, you would need to add a mail exchange record or an MX record. We have name server records, and that's basically the server that has authority, that's authoritative for a particular primary zone. And so that's what a name server record is. And then we've got a service record, which are for various services that you might have. Those are called SVR records. So that's the different types of records you can add. So what we want to do for our server, I'm going to set this up basically as a home server. So we're going to add a machine record here. And you notice we've got our zone already filled in. If you had multiple zones, those zones would show up here in the drop down, but we don't. And so in here, we just want to put what we want in front of this. And so our host name is basically server.toddolthoff.com. That's what we set up before. So that's what we're going to put in there. So you can see it changes that. It adds it up here. Everything looks right. And then we put in the actual IP address of our server. Okay, 10.0.1.3, which is what we had put on the server tab over here. And you can put some text in if you wanted to say something about this particular host name, but we don't have to worry about that. We're just going to say create. Now you'll notice as soon as we say create, you can see we've got our primary zone there. Now what we've got is we've got a machine record for server.toddolthoff.com, and we've got a name server record that automatically gets added. Now you'll also notice down below here that we've got a PTR record here, and that's basically it's a reverse zone record that's set up that says, hey, I want to make sure that you are who you say you are. And so it's a pointer record that determines if you are who you say you are, because it does a reverse check. So it does not only checks your IP address going forward, it checks it backward as well. You can see how this is kind of set up backward there, just to make sure that I am who I say I am and that my server is not fake, or I'm not trying to spoof anything, but it's reality. And so that sets that zone up for me automatically, and those are ready to go. If you had a front-facing server and you were working with a particular maybe co-location facility, you wouldn't need that record. They own that record for you. But in this case, everything looks good and is all set up. So once I have this all set up, all I need to do is click the switch to actually start the service. And once I do that, then everything comes live. Now, before I start the service, I thought I'd show you another way that you could set up DNS, just in case you wanted to just have the server set it up for you. And you can do that by coming in here to the host name area. What you would do is just come in here and click edit, and we're going to go back through this change host name information here. We're not going to change anything, but we're going to get to the end, so we allow the server to actually set up DNS for us. So I'm just going to say next. We're going to say internet again, just like we did before. Say next, and everything's the same. We didn't change anything in here. We're going to leave it exactly as it is. Our network address is the same, host name and everything. We're going to say finish, and then we get the little drop down that says, do you want DNS set up automatically? So we're going to say set up DNS, and we're just going to actually click on that and have the DNS service set up. And notice it's configuring everything. It's actually starting the services. It's updating the service host name, and it's going to do all of the configuration for us and start the DNS service. So I did that. I had deleted the DNS before. I did that because I wanted to show you what happens when the server sets it up for you. Now notice as the server has set this up for us, we've got everything set kind of the way we did it before, with one minor change. You notice here that they basically set up a primary zone for server.toddolthoff.com as opposed to toddolthoff.com. Now the reason I did this is because for many of you at home, you have what's called a split DNS, and that means that you may host your website outside your server and host it with your provider. And so you've got part of your DNS handled outside, part of it handled inside. And so if you just left the primary zone as toddolthoff.com, in this case, if I tried to pull up my actual website, which is hosted outside, my server would look for the website internally, not find it, and return nothing, so I wouldn't be able to view my website. But by putting server.toddolthoff.com in front of that for the primary zone, then basically my server is only handling this particular subzone, so to speak, of my domain, whereas my provider is handling the primary on anything that's toddolthoff.com itself. Like I have mail hosted there and all that kind of stuff. So basically just kind of gives you an idea of how to set that up and get that running. Now that we've got DNS set up and running and everything's there, you can see it's set to my primary address there, and that's my public IP address, and says everything's ready to go. What we want to do now is make sure that we set everything up on the outside, because I've set up an internet DNS setup, so I want to make sure that I've got it at my hosting provider. So what I'm going to do is let me just pull up a cPanel here for my hosting provider. And in every host, you have a DNS editor of some kind. And so here I've got a simple DNS zone editor. So I'm just going to click on that for a minute. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that on the internet, everybody can find my server, because if not, I can't access it remotely. So what I want to do is set up an A record with my domain registrar for my server at my public IP address. And so you would put in your information there, say add record. Now I've already done that. And so you can see down here, I've got my server name all set up. It's an A record. And then this is my public IP address, and everything's ready to go. So what that means is if anybody tries to access this, including myself, remotely, it's going to point it towards my server, towards the IP address of my server, so that I can get access remotely. Depending on your provider, you'll have different ways of doing this and different setups, but that kind of gives you an idea of how that works and how to get those things set up and running. So let me just go back to the actual server here, and I'm just going to pop that down. And so that means that everything's set up for us on the web, so we should be able to access it remotely, and everything's set with DNS. So now that we've got our DNS set up, there's a couple of things that we can do to test it just to make sure that it's working properly. Okay, so now we're going to test to make sure that the DNS is working on your server. And so what you want to do is go to Terminal. You can see I've got a bash window open here. And basically what we're going to do is just test to see that our records are okay. And so what you want to do is type in this command. You want to put in dig with a space, and then in dash X, and then your IP address that you put there for your server. Okay, so there's mine all set up. And then you want to hit return. And what this is going to do is return all of your records to make sure that everything lines up right. You can see we've got the reverse record here that shows we have that PTR record. It's showing that that PTR record goes to our server's host name. Again, it shows that the name server is our server host name, and then it says in addition that this host name is an A record that goes to this IP address. And so you can see it's returned from our server here. This 127.0.0.1 just means itself, that it's referred to itself, and it's pulled back this information. So that's one way we can test to make sure that the DNS is working. Looks like everything is in order here. Another way to do it, if you wanted to, is you could go to the network utility, and you can do a lookup right in here. If you go to the network utility and go to lookup, you can put in your information there. So let's put in our server information. Okay, and then we just say look up, and you can see that it says, hey, here is the server name, and it goes to this IP address, so we know that that's correct. We can also do it by IP address if we want to. And then say look up, and it'll do the same thing the other way, that this IP address goes to our server. So it looks like everything's up and running with DNS, and we should be set to go to configure some of the other services. So that's all I have for this week. I'll be back at you next week with another screencast to help you learn how to do more things with your Mac.